podcast. The Heidelcast.
It's a Heidelminicast. And now, Scott Clark.
Well, this is a tough question. What about the draft?
If the Heidelcast helps you, won't you help us keep it going? Please make the coffer clink by clicking on the PayPal link or by sending a check to Heidelberg Reformation Association, 1637 East Valley Parkway, number 391, Escondido, California, 92027.
Let's open up the coffer here and pull out this message.
You've got some letters.
Well, let's read some emails, shall we?
Yeah, we have letters and email, and so we're going to read this one. It comes from Joe. No, it's from Oakland Hills Community Church in beautiful Farmington, Michigan. And been there. It's a beautiful place. Lovely in the fall, particularly. I'm sure it's beautiful in the spring and in the summer. I think maybe challenging in the winter, it being north of Detroit, but beautiful place, wonderful people, and they have a great pastor, our own Dr. Harrison Perkins, who is vice chairman of our board, the Heidelberg Reformation Association, and pastor of Oakland Hills Community Church in Farmington Hills, Michigan. And I'm sure they are, what do they say? Michigan Pure. Is that? Or Pure Michigan, I think is what it is. Okay. So he says, I was wondering if there is any kind of consensus in the confessionally reformed world on the justice or ethics of military conscription, the draft. There is a lot of talk in the media that I consume about the potential for some kind of large-scale war in the not-so-distant future. An example would be a conflict with China if our government is unable to deter an invasion of Taiwan. For instance, it's my understanding that there could be a massive number of casualties early on in such a conflict. God willing, this will not happen, but it has me thinking. I realize there are different views among Christians of various stripes on the use of military force and just war generally. But my question is with regard to forced military conscription specifically. Should Christians oppose such measures? Thank you for all you do and for your ministry. I'm a member of the OPC because of it. Well, thank you, Joe. That's encouraging. I appreciate that. Thanks for listening. Well, it's a challenging question, and as you say, different Christians of different traditions have taken different views of this, and it may be that even some in the Reformed tradition have taken different views. I'm not aware of it, but that says more about my ignorance than my research. I've not really looked into this, so I thought it might be helpful, despite my ignorance, to kind of walk with you through this question and to give you an idea of how I go at it. And I think, immediately of Matthew 22:15 and following, and I'm reading from the English Standard Version, then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words, and they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and that you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax. And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, Whose likeness and inscription is this? They said, Caesar's. Then he said to them, Therefore, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away. Now, there are other things that we could look at, as you say. This involves the question of self-defense, and I have written a little bit about that on the Heidel blog, tried to make a biblical case for self-defense. I think it can be done, and I just published recently on, in the critique of the statement on Christian nationalism, a little bit about the just war theory, some history, and some primary source material from Augustine. Right, so that might be of use too. And if we get to it, we can link that in the show notes. But if we don't, you can, of course, find it at heidelblog.net. It's easily found. So what about the question, what should we think? I don't know any Reformed opposition to the draft per se, to conscription per se. I wonder if the Covenanters who didn't vote when they first came to this country, and they didn't vote for a long time. And I don't remember exactly when it was that they began voting, but it might be in the early 1960s. And so if you belong to the RPCNA, or if you know about that tradition, you can correct me at heidelblog.net when this is posted. Just leave a comment. And I know I've looked this up, and it's one of those things that I just don't remember precisely. But certainly I believe it is the case that for a long time in this country, a better part of 200 years, they were here for a long time, that they didn't participate in the government or in voting or in the civil life of the country because the country doesn't have a constitutional amendment declaring that this is a Christian nation. And that was part of the National Covenant doctrine. So lacking that, they didn't believe that they could participate in the civil life of the country.
This is the Heidelcast.
The Heidelcast.
It's certainly the case, as far as I know, that the Scottish Presbyterians were not averse to fighting. They did plenty of that in the 16th and 17th centuries, and I'm sure they fought in World War I, and I know they fought in World War II in Scotland. But what the RPCNA folks did, and they don't call themselves Covenanters anymore, but what they did in this country and how they viewed the draft, I don't know. That's an interesting question. But otherwise, beyond that, I don't know of any reformed aversion to the draft. And so, as I say, the first thing I think about is Matthew 22. So we have civil obligations to the magistrate. And when I think about World War I, which has been disastrous, really, right? In some ways, we are still suffering the effects of the First World War. And it was a disastrous enterprise, a disastrous war. It wrecked Europe, and it set the stage for World War II, which was responsible for something like 50 million deaths. And, of course, we're still feeling the effects of that, too. The whole world changed. The whole map was rearranged in World War II. So, these are not light things. And yet, even though arguably, World War I was a giant mistake, maybe it was necessary, but I'd be hard-pressed to in 2024 agree that it was absolutely necessary. But, be that as it may, and lots of people had misgivings, and yet, Reformed Christians, to the best of my knowledge, again, I'm happy to be corrected, went to what was arguably served in what was arguably a foolish war. And people have objected to Vietnam, and they've objected to the war in Iraq, and so forth. So there have been lots of dubious enterprises in American history, military enterprises, I mean, and we're facing who knows what in the future. As I look at things and try to analyze the news and listen to what the State Department says about what American policy is. The one China policy is the official policy of the United States, and they seem to be backing away from their support for Taiwan. They seem to be wanting to support them with materiel and money, but it seems unlikely that they're going to actually send American service people to bleed and die in defense of Taiwan. So at least that's, again, I'm not a prophet and not even a real political scientist. I studied political science as an undergraduate, but don't do that for a living. I'm a preacher, a historical theologian. I study and teach church history. And so you're what I'm telling you on this stuff relative to what might happen is worth what you're paying for it, which is not very much.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
It was debated in the ancient church whether Christians could serve in the Roman military, and it was a reasonable question because obviously until AD 313, Christians were being persecuted by the Roman Empire. They're being arrested and put to death, which could create the possibility of Christian soldiers arresting Christians whose only crime was saying that they were Christians and refusing, then when demanded, to say that Caesar is Lord in the same sense in which Jesus is Lord, and refusing to renounce Christ, and refusing to burn incense or make an offering to Caesar as a god or to the gods. So refusing to participate in the official state Roman religion. Remember, the pagans had a state religion, and it looks like they would like to have another one, and they'd like Christians to be made to cooperate, be made to go along with the program as it was in original, early paganism, but that's a whole other episode. So there's that background too that adds maybe a layer of complication. But in general, I would say if somebody came to me and said, Pastor, I've been called up, I have to register for the draft, and I've done so, and I've been called up for some military conflict, for training and possible deployment, and I would say, I think you have to go, unless it is a patently unjust war and your conscience forbids you, that you can't see any way in which this is a just war, but then you have to be prepared to suffer the consequences, whatever that might be. Because if you're not a conscientious objector to military service or to killing on behalf of the state as a citizen of the state, but you're just objecting to this particular war. Let's say you didn't want to go to Vietnam or something like that. Well, then you'd have to do like Muhammad Ali did, and he refused. He thought the Vietnam War was unjust, and they sent him to prison for it. And that might be one option. That's an unhappy option, but that might be the only thing left to do it. But all things being equal, and the conflict being a just conflict, and I think, for example, after 9/11 and we went into Afghanistan, I don't think anybody thought that, well, that's an unjust thing to do. It was a defensive war. We could argue about Iraq. Things look different now in 2024 than they did in 2004, and so in that sense, hindsight is 2020. There were plenty of people in 2004 saying that it was a bad idea. I recognize that, but it is certainly a lot clearer now, 20 years hence. Now that's how I would go at this: is to think about Matthew 22 and the things that belong to Caesar, and certainly civil service and military service, apart from a general objection to any kind of military service. But apart from that, those things belong to Caesar. These things, or this question, I think, comes under the heading of a twofold kingdom. And so I've been pointing people to Calvin's language in the Institutes, where he says we live in a duplex regimen, a twofold regime, a twofold government. And, one sphere of that government is sacred, and that's represented by the visible church, and one sphere is secular or temporal, and that's represented by the state. And it's broader than the state, but it's represented by the state. And so that way of thinking also, I think, influences me. We have responsibilities under the secular or temporal sphere, under the twofold government of God over all things.
Thanks for listening. Tune in tomorrow for more from the Heidelcast, brought to you by Heidelberg Reformation Association.org. Don't forget, when the coin in the coffer clinks, the cost of bandwidth shrinks. Copyright Heidelberg Reformation Association. All rights reserved. This is a Heidel Media production.
The best podcast, the Heidelcast.